As you may have noticed, my last few videos have involved robots, specifically mechs, that I've built out of various found objects, but also a lot of cast resin pieces. One thing that I did find particularly useful in my last mech build was some plastic baubles to create the main body shape. You can get these in various sizes, right up to really big ones like this, and I started thinking that these would be quite useful in coming up with a body shape for a mech. You can also get these edge-shaped pieces as well, so I started thinking that these would be really useful for my next project. So in this video I'm going to build another mech, but I'm primarily going to use plastic baubles to create the main body shape. So I've had an initial go at just taping some pieces together to come up with a shape that might work for a mech. I've just taped various plastic shapes together and also added a few resin cast pieces as well. Now my initial inspiration for this was actually this spaceship from Guardians of the Galaxy. If you look at the basic structure of this, it's made up from various geometric shapes which have basically been joined together. So I thought this might be quite a good approach for actually coming up with a interesting shape for a mech. So what I'm going to do is glue the plastic shapes together and then smooth them out by putting some car body filler in between the gaps between the shapes, and then sand that down so I can smoothly transition between shapes. As an aside, I don't know if you're aware of Google Keep, but this is something that's available to anyone with a Google account, and it's really good for just sort of posting notes and links and things like that. What I use it for is image galleries for projects I'm working on. I have got large folders of robot reference and various other reference images on my computer, but none of them are actually tagged in any sense, so it's very difficult to search for things. What you can do in Keep is actually create custom galleries. So what I do here is really just go through Pinterest and places like that and save any images that I think might be useful for a particular project. You can then add any notes to it, and you can also add labels to it as well. So if you want to filter all of your notes by a particular subject, you can do. And as you can see, what I'm doing here is saving teal coloured robots to sort of give me some idea as to how my robot might look. I bought myself a few Tamiya spray paints recently, and one of the colours was a colour that I previously used on this robot here. Now, I really liked that colour at the time, so I thought I could maybe use it again on this mech. So in order to give myself some ideas for the project, I went through various websites and saved any similarly coloured robots. This is just useful to give me some ideas for colour schemes, but also find it useful for seeing how people add mechanical details. So if we look at this model here, for example, there's quite a lot of cool reference as to how they've added in pistons and things like that. So I just find this thing really, really useful when I'm building my own projects, as it gives me some ideas as to how to proceed. So now that I've got a basic idea of how this is going to come together, what I now need to do is mark the plastic shapes. One thing I've found with making mechs and robots and anything mechanical really, is that it's quite easy to get things misaligned. So what I'm doing here is just marking out some points on the sphere using the grid on the cutting mat, and I'm using some masking tape to go over the edge of the sphere and allow me to get a straight line all the way across. Obviously the idea of these models is that they were produced in factories, so they should be very, very precise. Of course I'm building them by hand, so I'm much more prone to getting things misaligned and disjointed. So I do find it very useful to have some guidelines on the shapes that I'm joining together to help me line them correctly. I also want some sort of exhaust ports on the back of the model, so I'm cutting down some drain pipe with the bandsaw here. And that's going to sit on the back of the model like that. Now, as I mentioned, what I want to do is use some Bondo to smooth out the transition between these spheres. So what I'm doing here is just packing out this interior section with foil, and I can now go over that with some Bondo. What I also want to do is have some ports on the sides. This will be where the arms will join on. So I'm just cutting a hole in the side of the Dremel. I've got these cast resin pieces from a previous project that I can glue in place. Now I'm going to be getting rid of the lower section of these spheres, so what I want to do is have a nice smooth edge. So what I'm doing is gluing on some plastic edge stripping and then adding some more Bondo to the edges there. That just lets me get a nice smooth edge. Now that my Bondo's dried, I can now start sanding that down. Bondos does sand quite easily, but as you may imagine, this took quite a while to sand down to a smooth finish. What I also want to do is have some gun pods in the top of the model, sort of like something you might find on like a 1950s bomber. So what I want to do is cut some holes in the top of the model and then put some more plastic spheres in there, which will have some guns attached and they can swivel around. So what I need to do is have a nice edging strip to that, so that I've got a nice smooth transition from the main body to the ports where the gun turret will sit. So what I'm doing is cutting out some rings from a previous cast piece of resin, and as I need two identical pieces, I've made a mould of that and I've cast up two sections. So they're going to sit on the model like this. I'm thinking perhaps that one of these pods could be a gun turret, but the other one maybe could be a cockpit, so I might even have a clear window so you can see the pilot inside. Haven't quite decided yet, but I quite like that idea. So now that I've got some of the main structure done, I'm now applying a layer of primer to this. The primer just allows you to see any further indentations and imperfections that you need to clean up. And now that I've got a layer on there, I have indeed found some more, so I'm adding some more Bondo and sanding down. This can sometimes take several passes, so it's just a matter of keep going and going until you get a nice smooth finish. I also have this sphere on top of the model, and that's going to basically be a rotating gun turret. So what I want to do is cut this in half so that the top half can rotate and the lower section can sort of serve as a mounting point. So I'm just cutting that in half with the Dremel and then sanding it down with the disc sander. And that's going to sit on top like that. So I've now smoothed down my main section, and I've now got to the point where I can start adding in some panel lines. Now obviously real manufactured vehicles aren't made of one piece of metal, they're made of lots and lots of different shaped panels. So in order to give that impression, what I need to do is cut in some very fine lines to demonstrate that. So what I'm doing initially is just drawing in pencil on my model to sort of try and figure out exactly where these should lie. I found that if you use a Sharpie, the ink can actually come straight through the paint when you come to do your final paint job. So I'm avoiding using a Sharpie for this. Pencil should come off nice and easily, so I won't get any problems like that. So once I was happy with the basic arrangement of this, what I've done is to use some curved pieces of plastic to draw around to get a definite line as to where the panel should be. So what I'm now going to do is use some pieces of plastic as a guide and use a scalpel blade that I've sanded down to a flat point to scratch in some panel lines. It can obviously be a bit of a pain if you get this wrong, but what I've been doing is to do this very, very light at first and then slowly build this up. I'm also turning my attention to adding some additional surface details to this. So as you can see, I've got a piece of bent and curved wire here, and this is a soft aluminium wire that's very easy to bend. And this is going to be a piece of piping, so I'm just cutting in a port for that. I've also cut out a further piece from one of the globes into a round section, and I'm just putting that on as a sort of porthole or panel. And what I'm doing is using some sewing pins here to act as rivets. So there's the finished main body section. I've added various mechanical points here. A lot of these are like rivets from leather working, which I thought would be quite useful as sort of, I don't know, ports or something like that. As you can see, this egg section here I've actually turned into a hatch, so that might be where the crew get in and out. And I mentioned that I used some sewing pins as rivets for this round port. Well, what I've also done is use the necks of the sewing pins that I snipped off and bent those into some rungs on a ladder, so I think that's a way of the pilot climbing up and getting into the mech. As you can see, I've also added some additional details to this rotating turret at the top. If I take this off, you can also see there's some detailing underneath this as well. I mean, obviously a lot of this won't be seen, but given there's a gap between the bottom of the turret and the main body, I figured some of this would sort of peek through and hint at some internal mechanisms, which I thought would be quite effective. I'm now giving some thought to the arms of the mech, and what I've got here is some further egg-shaped plastic pieces that I've slightly sanded down. I figure this could be like the back of the hand, So what I need to do is make some fingers. Now, hands and feet on robots are often a bit of a pain because they're quite complicated, so there's lots of detail in there. So what I decided to do is make one finger, then make a mould of it and cast up several copies. That way I can get an entire hand out of one mould. So I thought that'd be quite a good approach. So what I've got here is some cast resin pieces and also some pieces of 15mm copper pipe that I've cut down to size. So I'm thinking that the cast pieces here could be the knuckles and these copper pieces could be the finger sections. So they can come together like that, and as you can see I'm putting some detail over the back of the knuckles. So these are bass strings and some pieces of wire, which I thought would serve as some sort of wiring detail. I've also got this conduit, which I thought would be quite good for the underside of the fingers as well. So there's my finished finger. I've filled in all of the cavities with some monster clay. Obviously this doesn't need to be stuck together as such. All it needs to do is to be able to hold the silicone away from itself in the correct shape for a mould. So filling in the gaps with monster clay does that job quite nicely. So now that that's ready, I can start making a mould of this. And as you can see, I've got my finger embedded in some clay here, and I'm making a two-part mould. So here's the mould that I've come up with, and here are the casts that I've made. So I think they're going to look pretty good coming together like that. What I've now got to do is just figure out how these are actually going to attach together. After a bit of back and forth, what I ended up using was some small cut pieces of more 15mm copper pipe, and I've also got some copper olives in there as well. So those are the internal pieces from compression joints. They're just slightly smaller than the 15mm copper pipe, so they sort of fit inside quite well. And that's how that's going to sit with the plastic piece on the back, so I think that's going to look quite effective. And my final piece here will serve as a thumb. So in order to complete the rest of the hand here, I'm just gluing some further bits and pieces in place. I think on the final piece this might need some further sort of mechanical detailing on the inside of the hand, but I'll come to that once I've got everything painted up and I can see how that will all look. I've also got some further resin pieces for the upper arm, and I'm thinking I can use some further clear plastic baubles here to serve as a shoulder pad. Now I need some sort of shoulder mechanism, and something that I found on eBay was these parts. Now what these are part of the suspension systems for remote control cars. They've got some really interesting mechanical details here, so I think these are coming really useful. So what I'm going to try and do is attach these two pieces together to give myself a shape that can allow the shoulder and arm to move in any orientation. What I also need to do is create some brackets for these shoulder pieces. The ports that I put in have got a 30mm internal diameter, so I need something to hold a sort of a central axis in place. So what I've got is some aluminium pipe here, and also some more acetal rod. So what I'm going to do is cut down the aluminium and the acetal to make myself some brackets. And as you can see, that fits inside like that, and I've also cut an internal hole so I can feed some brass tube through the centre. The aluminium and acetal shapes fit into the ports on the sides like that. I've also got some additional cast resin pieces just to add some mechanical detail, and there's my shoulder joint, which is made from the remote control car suspension sections. So I can now attach the arm for my robot onto the shoulder sections using some cable clips that just clip over the piece of aluminium rod that I've got running through it. And they just push in like that. So it gives me a nice shoulder joint, and the arm can now move about as much as it likes. For the leg sections, I've also got these, which are also parts of the suspension sections for remote control cars. I'm not quite sure how they work. I can sort of see how you might attach some wheels to those, but I figured they could work as thighs for my robot. I'm also using another bauble as a piece of chassis here, so I need to cut some more holes in this to allow the legs to come through. So I've got an internal section like this and some more cable clips which will allow me to attach the two sections together. Now the legs of course have got to take all of the weight of the mech, so what I've done is to add some additional aluminium rods here. I've sort of disguised them as pistons, but what they're actually there is just to hold everything in place. Once I've got the pose of this thing figured out, I'll actually super glue everything in place and probably add some screws as well. But for the time being this feels relatively solid, so it should do the trick. So I've just made this chassis section, which is just made out of some more clear plastic spheres, and that fits inside like that. I also need some lower leg sections, so I've just used some more 15mm copper pipe here. The top portion just attaches on with some pins like that. In order to give the legs some more shape, I've cut down some more clear plastic egg shapes here, and I'm going to use these as sort of panels. So I think that's looking okay, however the clear plastic isn't quite allowing me to see how this will look once it's all painted, so I've just given all of the panels a quick blast of primer. So now that's together, it's sort of approaching what the final look will be. Obviously I've got to finish off the other leg and also do another arm as well, but I think we're sort of in a good enough position here for me to leave it for this part of the video. So I've still got a few more mechanical bits and pieces to add to this and also paint it up of course, but I'll leave this for the time being. So thanks very much for watching and I'll see you next time. Thanks very much for watching. I'll be posting more videos on this project and others, so if you'd like to keep up with what's going on, please do subscribe. Alternatively, you can visit my website, which is www.thedarkpower.com, or you can find me on Facebook, just search for The Dark Power.